Welcome. Uh, Thank you for joining us for our elementary open house for prospective families. My name is Eileen McElrath. I am the elementary program director here at Great River School. I use she, her pronouns. And I also love to share that I'm also a parent of multiple children who attend Great River School.
I'm Karen Anway, and I'm the enrollment coordinator at Great River, among other things. And I'm a former elementary teacher, so I taught in our upper elementary here at Great River before moving to administration. And I am also a parent, and I have a child who attended from fourth grade and then graduated in 2022.
All right, so we are going to guide you through your experience at Great River. I know today we were not able to be in person, and we were very sad for that. And so we have the setting of one of our lower elementary classrooms. So we wanted to at least get you inside here. So if you are kind of looking around at those pictures and images later after our lottery, there are times for those who have um, invitations to enroll at Great River. There's times for tours then, but we wanted to get you inside now.
I also just wanted to say we've got a Q&A in as part of this session, and so please type your questions in there as you go through. We'll see if I can answer some of them. If it's just a one-person kind of question, then I'll try to answer those as we go, but we'll answer the bulk of them at the end of the presentation.
All right, so we're going to get started. All right, who are we? Great River is a public Montessori learning community that prepares students for their unique roles as responsible and engaged citizens of the world. At Great River School, we are a public charter school in the state of Minnesota, meaning we are our own school district and we are charged with doing something different. And for us, that charge is authentic Montessori education in a public setting. So, with all those same supports and different types of resources that a mainstream traditional public school has, but with the lens and framework of Montessori education.
So a public Montessori education means that we take a child-centered developmental approach to learning. It emphasizes independence, self-directed activity, and hands-on learning. You can see around us in this classroom, Montessori is in so many ways all about the materials and the experience of children in the environment interacting with the materials. And they're designed to teach and support the concepts that children are learning. The elementary Montessori curriculum uses concrete materials and practices, and the education was developed by Dr. Maria Montessori starting in 1907 and then building from then. She really fleshed out into the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
Fleshed out the curriculum and the materials. And as Eileen said, we're a public charter school. That means we have special education, we have English language learners services, we have intervention services. So really the kinds of supports that you're used to seeing in a public school, you'll also find at Great River School.
Uh, Earlier today, I was actually chatting with a parent, and one of the things we talked about was how just the framework for Montessori is so individualized. Yes, there's an order, and there is a kind of that scope and sequence of learning from a developmental lens. But because of how individualized it is, the supports that their child needs and just gets as a part of the fabric of how we do and structure our learning in the elementary felt very different than it did from the mainstream school they were coming from, where everyone has to sit in the same way. Everyone has math and literacy and these at the same times and these exact same lessons. Montessori is a really individualized developmental approach for teaching children. That's why it's called, you'll hear it described as a child-centered approach because it puts that child and their learning in the center. And even in the classroom, this is the children's space. This is not our space as adults. It feels and looks very different, but this is our student space. So speaking of that, you'll hear some terms. We've talked a little bit about Montessori. Dr. Montessori is both a person and it's an educational framework. And we actually also use the term Montessori when we're talking about the curriculum. the actual materials Dr. Montessori developed and that she observed using in children and she developed through those observations are our curriculum in elementary. We have an elementary Montessori school. Guide is what we call teachers because they guide children. They're not imparting knowledge into a brain, but guiding them through the environment, presenting lessons, and using those materials so they can practice in that child-centered approach. We also use terms for the different grade level bands here at Great River School. In elementary, we have lower elementary classrooms, which are grades 1 through 3, and we have 6 lower elementary classrooms. Upper elementary are a combination of grades 4 through 6, and we have 6 upper elementary classrooms. And in each of those classrooms, there are around 10 or 11 students of each grade level, so it's mixed and multi-grade and multi-age. In lower adolescent, we have grade 7 through 9 and upper adolescent 10 through 12. You'll also hear the term International Baccalaureate because, like most public Montessori high schools in the United States, of which we are the only public Montessori high school in the state of Minnesota, most of those end with an IB diploma program. An International Baccalaureate is a standard of learning that is really globally focused and minded. And so it's such a good fit with a public Montessori education and an incredibly rigorous and kind of world view of how we do learning. An example I always give is instead of US history, students take history of the Americas, taking not a US-centric view, but a world view. So there's an adolescent open house going on, so we're not going to talk more about that tonight, but I know you can connect more with Karen if you are looking for that information in her role as enrollment coordinator. So what is a developmental approach to education?
Yeah, so in Montessori, she was a scientist. She was actually trained as a medical doctor. And so she really started from the ground floor in terms of coming up with an educational system. She started by observing the students. And then everything that she wanted to do educationally really flowed from what she observed in the students. And so she divided development into 4 major planes that she kind of in 6-year spans. So there's infancy, which is the first plane from age 0 to 6, and characterize that as help me to do it by myself. Children learning to be independent. You know, anybody who's had a toddler who has ideas of what they want to wear in the morning knows that they want to do it by themselves, no matter how long it takes. Second plane is what we're really working with in elementary. It's ages 6 through 12. And it builds on the independence of the first plane to say, help me to think for myself. And so students are still really learning about independence and how to get along in the world. They're learning about the world, but then they're also really coming up with the ways that they're constructing their knowledge and their foundational skills that they're going to use the rest of their lives. Third plane then would be adolescence, so grades or ages 12 through 18. And so that's really students looking for what their place is in the world, trying to find themselves. And then the fourth plane would be ages 18 through 24, so kind of the college years, and that's about help me to support myself. So really, she took a view of child development as being the work of the child is to construct the adult that they will become. And so she really saw that every part of the child's development was designed to making a self-supporting adult who knows their place in the world, knows their skills, knows their talents, knows who they are and what they want to do in the world. And that's one of the things I really love about Montessori education is because the choice involved in the classroom means that children are constantly discovering themselves and what they're good at and what they like doing. And I think that's really unique compared to other educational systems.
Well, and I think something that Karen highlighted was also thinking about that our role, our work as guides and as adults, the work of the child is to develop themselves. And the work of the adults and the guides and the assistants is to create environments and lessons that allow children to explore their interests, that have adults asking themselves, how does this promote independence? How am I building and creating environments that allow the children to build these skills to develop through those planes into their full selves and know who they are? And so, one of the big things we hear from our graduates, because we now have graduates who have come all the way
Mhm.
through, is that when they go off into college, not only are they incredibly skilled in terms of their writing and their reading and those traditional areas like math, but they also know who they are. They know their interests. They're able to write and produce and take a project and carry it all the way through because a big part in the elementary years, especially that second plane, is also learning how to exist with each other. Those of you with elementary age children or those on the cusp of that second plane have probably noticed that peers have started becoming more important and learning how to navigate conflict, how to work in a group, what a lot of businesses call soft skills, but we really know, and Dr. Montessori knew, not only were those skills of collaboration, but it's also motivation for children in the second plane to learn because they want to learn together. They are social beings. And so guides know that. And that's part of the observation of supporting them in those skills and giving them the actual space to build those skills during those supports. So obviously we could talk about Dr. Montessori all day, but first we'll talk a little bit about like what this actually looks like.
Mhm. Yeah. And as a Montessori teacher, I think one of the most beautiful things about the Montessori curriculum is the way it's structured.
Mhm.
So you start the year every year with the 5 great lessons. And those lessons are the stories of the universe, the story of life, the story of humans, then the story of language, and the story of math. So really you have all these different strands of how did we come to be here in this
Mhm.
place and time? What skills have humans developed over time and how, just basically our journey through time to be here. And then the rest of the curriculum really rests on those stories because they're so holistic. And that helps children really organize their knowledge, get an idea of kind of how things relate to each other, and helps them have that curiosity, which really drives them to build their academic skills. And so we're teaching language, we're teaching math. Often those things are grounded in history and in stories and really meant to capture the imagination and to tie things together. And then we also do a lot of work around the executive functioning skills of how to learn. And because our students spend a lot of their time in the classroom being independent, we really need to work with them to have them understand what work is, how to work, how to start something, work on something, finish something, how, to follow that through. And Eileen has a nice little visual aid here.
I was able, so all of our children in the elementary, one of our key tools we have are work journals. And this is actually a work journal from my own child from last year. So you'll see it was very loved. And starting in first grade, they start using this tool, not necessarily to make a plan, but to record what they're doing. And so sometimes that includes making a plan, and sometimes it's recording their work. So that's a little different. As they grow in their skills, they may also make a plan, record that follow on, and guides use it when they conference with students on a day-to-day basis or when they conference students throughout the week. So you'll see things like the day and date, what they started with. Eventually, students start recording the time so they can go back and reflect on their learning. And it is that ongoing tool of time management that they use every single day when they're in elementary school.
Time management and lesson management as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they're recording the lessons that they've had, and then the lessons have follow-on work. And so part of the guide's job is to hold children accountable. You've had this lesson. Where's your follow-on work? Have you followed on?
Mm-hmm.
Have you mastered this material? Can we move on now? And so a lot of that is kind of a dialogue between the guide and the student. And so a lot of the lessons are group lessons. They're not necessarily all individual lessons. But then students have a lot of individual choice and how they follow on from their lessons. And so that's often where the differentiation comes in, or, just the child's own ideas of what they want to do.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of that personalization and individualization and recognizing that we all come in different places. And even if you're coming from a casa, a children's house, that primary Montessori environment, I brought one of my other children's is sometimes there's a scaffold or support where it looks a little different until you're ready for that bigger line paper, those bigger pieces. So it feels very manageable and students start respecting themselves. They practice that skill, and it's one of the it's in my mind one of those superpowers of Montessori that unlike a traditional mainstream environment where the adult is doing the thinking and the learning and using their skills to guide children, we're having that time and space for children to practice that skill. And the guide's responsibility and what they're doing is supporting them in that development.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times, one of the biggest myths of Montessori is like children just do whatever they want. And what they actually do is they have the space to build that responsibility, but the adults have that responsibility. I'm like, oh, I noticed that your work journal ended at 10 o'clock, but I saw you here. Where were you? What happened? And they're like, oh, I forgot to write it down. Or in upper elementary, or even as they get older in lower elementary, they might graph how they're spending their time, mixing in math lessons and standards with that executive functioning development. And so there are a lot of different ways that looks in terms of building responsibility, but also having it um, interweave with respect for themselves, others, and care of the environment. And so I think that's another piece. While this is a personal tool of responsibility and their work, there's also a large focus on our community. And that was a really important belief of Dr. Montessori. She was the original peace education. And so caring about who we are in community together. And when we talk internally and externally, we actually don't call them classrooms, we call them communities. And while our communities are named after rivers and they all have their own identities and traditions, part of what children learn and have time with is how to be in community together. How do I navigate sharing materials? If I have needs or want to bring something to the community, we have weekly community meetings where children are bringing issues. And with the support of guides, more support in lower, it kind of letting go of that support and having even more child directed in upper elementary, that they're bringing those issues and having real conversations as a community and with each other. And so it is about children learning how to collaborate, learning how to work next to each other, with each other, in community with each other. And that's one of the ways we really build in that personal responsibility and growth mindset as well. There's that personal individual piece and the community piece where we're interconnected to each other. Mm-hmm. And that was a strong belief of Dr. Montessori, as well as all of our guides and Montessorians here. But I also think it ties back to where Karen began with those holistic stories or great lessons of who are we together as life here in the universe. And if you have the opportunity to see the wonder that comes with children when they first hear those great lessons or get stories, forever my favorite is the little black strip. Mm-hmm. And it is a concrete lesson material where children are learning like, this is the history of Earth. This is the history. Where are we on here? Humans are only this little spot here. Look at all this life. And every year I have moments where I see children going to one end and then walking as fast as they can to the other and saying like, we only took this much space. What does that mean? And it's from those lessons and experiences that their curiosity gets sparked. And then they wonder and they want to learn about animals and life and each other and geology and the rocks. And that's one of those ways through those types of lessons that guides are helping to spark curiosity, connect to those interdisciplinary subject areas, bring in writing, bring in group work. And so it happens so naturally through these stories and those concrete lesson presentations that happen.
I remember the first time I gave the story of the universe lesson at Great River, I had told the story, which is a beautiful story, and it involved, it has like balloons popping and lots of different things happening in it. And then I finished and the children clapped. And I was like, oh, that's wow, okay. But it was so cool because they were just so into it. I mean, what a great story.
So it's something very unique that when we talk about the Montessori curriculum, that's a really big part of how we're very different.
Yeah, and we've talked about a lot of this. We probably shouldn't spend 15 minutes per slide. So the focus of the curriculum is the Montessori materials, like we talked about. It's really this idea of meaningful work. There's also an idea of big work
Mhm.
that often children will spontaneously choose to just do something really big just because they can, which is so fun to see. It's hands-on work, and so it's really meant to engage children, not just with their minds, but with their hands, with their bodies. And there's a lot of research that shows that learning is much more thorough and permanent when you are incorporating your whole body into the concept. And
And
then we talked about individual work plans,
Mhm.
and we've talked about the IB curriculum also. So we've been very thorough.
So some of the things you might see on the screen in this, you see the students with the little tiles. That's the stamp game. And it's one of those concrete materials that spirals through all of the mathematical operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And so children use that concrete material to do that practice. And it has self-correction as a part of it. And they're moving the materials as well as eventually writing those out to transfer them to a page. So they're seeing and experiencing what does a unit, what does one feel like? And they're setting it down. And what we know from current research is actually all education is recommended to go back to that, starting with the concrete from the earliest years, and then moving to those representational, what does it look like? And then abstract, what many of us remember of like solving a math problem. You'll also see the two students working together on some different group work, that idea of working together on some bigger work. And then in the picture in the lower right-hand corner is actually mapping out our grammar materials, mapping out sentences, understanding language, and the action of a verb. I always love the lesson that introduces the verb because there's a little red ball and it bounces because verbs move and they act. And so it's creating those concrete representational experience so children really remember and understand those in different ways. And so those grammar materials, again, spiral up in concrete ways and move throughout the curriculum. Just like our math materials use the same colors throughout their time in lower and upper elementary to represent those different place value pieces. And so it has that visual connection as well as the concrete connection, regardless of the math material.
Mhm. All right. And why do students succeed at Great Rivers? We really see our graduates coming back and talking a lot about that they learn to be independent, that they get to college and they understand what they are supposed to do with their free time. And so they're doing well in college because right off the bat, they understand how to keep up with their classes. They're, learning responsibility. I think that we work hard to preserve the joy of learning and curiosity in our students. And we work really hard in grades 1 through 12 on that. I think a lot of students get frustrated or disillusioned with school. And of course, there are days here that children might be frustrated or might not want to do that particular lesson. But I think that we see in our children that there are also those moments of joy, and just the spontaneous, like, I really want to do this big thing. I saw some children make a model of the Titanic one year. That was so cool. I saw some children draw a scale model of a giant squid. Is
Yep.
that what they were doing
Yep.
last
They
year?
were
Yeah.
all the way down the hallway.
Yeah.
Very big. Labeling was
Mhm.
beautiful.
Yep, I've seen children write, pages and pages and pages in the writing works that they've had in Upper L. I did a project with the Odyssey where they would just write and write and write to tell that story, So really, it's children choosing to challenge themselves because it is joyful.
And I would say that joy piece, right now in upper elementary, we use a 3-year cycle because children are in our lower upper elementary over 3 years. And this part of our 3-year cycle, we're doing a large making history project across all of our 6 classrooms. And it's not a project the way we think of projects in school in the same way, but that's kind of that theme as they learn about the beginning of humans and it get to both experience and write and research pieces of history, pieces of science, write with each other, work in a group. And throughout our conversations and work collectively as a team on that, the question I often hear brought up the most is how are we creating joy in this experience? And I think that's something really different for those of us who have maybe been in traditional mainstream environments is the question of joy and rooting in joy for children and learning isn't just something we say we happen to do. It's a key question that our guides, remember, those are our teachers, our guides continually bring up again and again and again in conversations because it's a key part of what it means to be a Montessori guide. How are we creating joy? How are we being child-centered? So it's part of the fabric of our practice. And it's also part of what ties into that last kind of idea on this slide of community and relationships. Relationships bring joy and they bring conflict, and we learn how to navigate those. And sometimes it's about really building out tools, like we have a formal peace talk process that has visuals, it has a student side, it has a staff side that any staff member can use as we're dealing with the smallest thing to navigating who's sitting in a workspace to larger conflicts. And so having those processes and using those to the point where I get in classrooms and I see children be like, we need a peace talk, and they'll go grab it and they'll have a classmate facilitate a peace talk between other classmates. And so thinking about building those skills of relationship so that there is the space for joy. And so we're not just saying, oh, it always is joyful, but we're working through and building the skills that we all need as human beings in this world.
And I would say, we take a very restorative approach to problems of discipline that arise in our community. And I think a big part of having a restorative approach be successful is really investing the time in the planning and talking and working through those problems. So you can't just kind of say, okay, everybody's going to apologize and then we'll forget. You really have to say, how are we all going to move forward after this thing that happened that we can't undo, but we can talk about the future and we can talk about what we're going to do differently. And then really making the plans and children holding themselves and each other accountable to those plans. And I think that that's really what that kind of approach needs in order to really be successful and work out in ways that we see every day because the children have these skills and they understand how to navigate these things, how to talk about the future.
And sometimes it's individuals or in small groups. Sometimes it's a whole community. And so those community meeting times of like, oh, the guide might bring, or another child in the community might bring, we are spending a lot of time cleaning up at the end of the day. What should we do about that? And of course, in a lower elementary classroom, the guide's going to offer some additional options or kind of help guide children to make sure those options are on the table and really be leading it differently than you would in an upper elementary classroom with 9, 10, 11, and 12-year-olds. But children are starting to have modeled, they're seeing that process, they're trying it out. And so that whole community problem solving and kind of conflict resolution, as well as in smaller groups and individually, is just a part of what a Montessori community is and what one is here at Great River.
Yeah, so our daily schedule is a pretty simple schedule. Again, with Montessori, one of the key parts of Montessori is having a 3-hour period that is a work period and isn't interrupted by things like special classes. So we have arrival from 8:50 to 9:10, eat breakfast in the cafeteria if children are getting breakfast. And then they move into this morning work period. And that's when children are having all of their core curriculum delivered, usually in small group lessons. So the teacher might call a child once or twice for a lesson during that time, but the rest of the time really is planned by the child with maybe some support if needed, to say, okay, I've had, these lessons in math or language or history, and this is what I'm doing to follow up.
Mhm.
And then we have a lunch and recess block. So lunch is eaten together in the classroom as a community. We have school lunch available, and so children go down and get it, bring it back to the classroom. And they have 45 minutes for lunch. And then we also prioritize movement and recess. So they have 45 minutes for recess every day. After that block in the afternoon, there's generally some community literacy time, read aloud in many classrooms. And there's an afternoon work period. And then we also have workshop specialists that work in the afternoons. And then at the end of the day is departure. So it's just a very simple schedule that contains a lot within it.
A lot inside.
But one of the big key principles of Montessori is to not interrupt children, because you're not going to get them to commit to big work if they only have 15 minutes or 20 minutes to do it. And then it's like, oh, move on, move on, move on.
And I would say, along with that, one of the key things that we're working on developing in all of our children, all of our students, is concentration. And so that morning and afternoon work periods are time not only to engage with those work and lessons, but also develop their concentration so they can get into that work, so they can find that flow.
Mhm.
And that's something that grows. We know when children start, we expect a different amount of concentration from a first grader coming in than we would expect from a sixth grader who's been with us for 5 or 6 years. And so with that, when children come, what Karen's describing of that like a lesson per day, it might look a little different in the first few weeks because guides know, oh, my new to the elementary first graders are going to need some bigger group lessons and follow on and different kind of work.
Mhm.
And so that onboarding at the start of the year looks a little different than that flow as we get going. And you have to remember that it's a multi-age classroom. So they're coming into a classroom that has, in first grade, that has second and third graders who have been there. They know the flow, they know the cycle, they know that work period. They have works that they've done before. And so they jump right into that very differently than those 10 or 11 first graders do. So it's not a classroom of 30 first graders, it's 10 or 11. And so that onboarding and having models in the classroom who know the culture, who know the community, who know that flow, they have more models than they do new students every year. So that it's like 2/3 those second and third graders. So that's something important to remember too. I will share that those great stories, those lessons, that Karen shared about our whole class lessons,
Mhm.
which is a nice time. That's why those usually happen earlier in the year, especially the first couple, because you bring so much follow on from those. And it's a good way for children to start getting plugged in and, frankly, inspired
Mhm.
by the Montessori curriculum.
And I see a question that we can address here when we're talking about concentration, and that is the role of technology in the
Ah,
classrooms.
yes.
So one thing about concentration is that in our observation, it does not seem appropriate for first through third graders to have a lot of technology use, that it seems really detrimental to their ability to concentrate and to do work. So we have no technology in the
Mm-mm.
classrooms for first through third graders.
Yep.
And then fourth through sixth graders, each classroom has some community devices,
Mhm.
about 4 or so community devices, generally used for research,
Mhm.
not used for long periods of time,
Correct.
because we kind of deliberately create a demand for those. That means that
Mhm.
no one student can keep it all morning.
Mhm.
And then as they get into the adolescent years, then they're using technology as a tool more often. And so,
One of the reasons we do that, there are no phones. We say smartwatches. I'm holding up my old-fashioned watch. Smartwatches remain in backpacks or don't come to school. We are really strong on technology. And what current research is showing us with children is that the way children's brains are interacting with technology is it really disrupts their ability to develop that concentration. It's giving them different type of stimulus, and giving them that different type of instant feedback, in a way that doesn't allow them to engage with reading and writing and exploring in the different subject areas in the same way. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier, but in terms of literacy, our curriculum around literacy is Montessori language materials. And some of those, we also have materials behind us. We use Washika for those students who are learning how to read for those foundational materials. We have grammar and other language materials. And in those Montessori materials align with evidence-based reading practices. In states outside of Minnesota, I think Nevada might be one, but some other states require a evidence-based reading based curriculum in all of their public schools. Minnesota doesn't require that, but in those states, public Montessori schools have presented research and had it approved and put on the list of approved curriculums because it is so evidence-based, which knowing Dr. Montessori and how she used science and the scientific method, observed children, and developed her materials from those observations and work, that makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
And so I'm incredibly proud of our work around literacy, and the way we've really integrated that. And what's unique about how we support literacy is that we teach it through writing. And so a lot of places only are teaching the reading part in the same way, and what writing is sometimes getting left out in different ways. We know as adults, when we produce, we're needing to write. And research is actually showing that when children write, they're showing an application of those reading skills. And so what's interesting is many of our children, especially in lower L, can write things sometimes before they can even read and say those. And they end up catching up as they go through the years with that reading and writing. And what I notice, especially as children go into upper elementary, is that the writing capabilities of, say, our fourth graders who came through our lower elementary compared with a fourth grader who might join us in fourth grade are vastly different because of the amount of writing skills they've gained through our Montessori curriculum.
Mhm.
And that in other schools, because they're on devices, they're giving up something else. And often that is actually some of that physical writing we know is so important.
Another thing just to mention here is I just skimmed over the workshop specialists,
Mhm.
but each classroom spends 2 afternoons a week roughly with a workshop specialist. And those specialists are this year, we have art, outdoor education,
Mhm.
health and wellness, and music. And so there's a question here about do we do art here? And I was going to say we have the art workshop specialist,
Yeah.
but actually we do a lot of art in
Yeah.
the work cycle as well. Children love to embellish and decorate and make their work beautiful, which is so, yeah, so
Everywhere.
important in terms of that ownership of I
Mhm.
made this and it's look how beautiful it is, that kind of sense.
And our workshop guides also do other work in our school, and sometimes we'll have small group lessons. I know we have a whole process with our art workshop guide, with an art mart where there's materials. So as students are doing that work, they have a way to get those materials. They can request lessons on different things to support their big work. And so that's really interwoven into the way those other lessons and choice exist, because students get to choose or have choices depending on the level of responsibility that they're showing, because it's a balance of freedom and responsibility. They might have choices in how they're showing that work, or they are coming up with their own if they're ready for that yet. And art is one of those ways. We also, our guides have different music lessons that they do throughout the curriculum. Here in the classroom, we have a set of bells. There are other Montessori materials that also integrate specialist areas that often aren't a part of that integrated curriculum. And so if you're curious for more about those, I know both the association, AMI, the Association of Montessori International, as well as the American Montessori Society, has some great just kind of summaries of what those different subject areas are. Everything from science and botany to geometry and math and history. And so it really is, it's not just literacy and math, it's this whole range of learning that's happening during those different lesson times.
Mhm.
Oh, almost. Oh,
All right. Well, we're in a lower
Lord.
classroom, and
some
here's
activities.
also a picture of one. And so, things to note really are that the classrooms are very decentralized. They're not organized around the teacher or the idea that the teacher is going to spend much of the day delivering content. So often there are small group tables for delivering lessons. Often the teacher moves around and joins a group of students to give a lesson rather than calling them over. And there are a variety of different kinds of spaces to work in. So elementary students love to work on the floor. So we have low tables for them to work at where they sit on the floor. We have rugs so they can get that out and lay their work out on the floor. We have desks. There's a question about, do children get movement breaks during our work time? And I mean, you're free to move really much of the morning. And so there is a lot of, going to the shelf, putting something away, getting something else out. And if that is not enough movement for a child's body, then there are other options for taking movement breaks. A lot of classrooms have things like a yoga work, or just some kind of, focused movement option that would be available that children could choose as well.
And that would be a great example when we mentioned kind of that idea of freedom and responsibility. That's for guides who have all been trained in Montessori practices as well as observation, that they're using those observation skills to be like, oh, this child needs, and they're using that to build those more individualized plan of like, oh, at 10 o'clock every day, we need to make sure you're plugged in to using that movement space or to doing something like this or to changing where you're sitting. And because freedom of movement is a part of the environment, when children need that, it doesn't stick out. It's just the fabric of what Montessori learning looks like. And so that individualized way of looking at learning, I think is one of those keys of what makes us different. And I know Karen mentioned that guides give lessons in different places, and you might have seen the low platform over here, a platform over there. We're actually sitting at another lesson table. And each of our classrooms has a lead guide who's delivering that curriculum, doing the planning, as well as a classroom assistant. And that classroom assistant might be supporting follow-on. They might take a group of students to do some movement or do some work in a different way. They might have students at a lesson table because they need some parallel work and need some more prompting while the guide is giving lessons. And so while the guide is really leading the curriculum and learning, they're a team with the classroom assistant as well as the guide. So the guide might come over on this low platform table over here and present a lesson, having called over a group of students that she knows she doesn't want to break their concentration. So when the guide is finished, they move to a new area, call a different group of students, maybe over to the larger platform. And so those students that got a lesson are not disrupted and moving on and following on from working with the material, for example. And so there are a lot of different ways that looks. And it, of course, looks different for a 12-year-old than a 6-year-old.
Yeah, and we can click through to upper elementary. So, similar idea, some low tables, rugs available, regular size tables, opportunity to work alone, opportunity to work in groups. Guides can do a lot of things to kind of help the environment be successful by things like, only having a table that goes up to 4 chairs, but not 8 chairs at a table, just things like that really help the students.
Having solo spots.
Right.
Or one of the other pieces is guides throughout the year, like, oh, I'm observing this in my students. I'm going to add a spot here. I'm going to move this around here. I think based on what I've observed, they need this sort of environment. So sometimes there will be little tweaks and adjustments throughout the year. And preparing that environment is one of the key things that the guides are doing. And the whole community is restoring the environment at the end of the day, putting things away, restoring it at the end of the morning work period. That's part of that work in the environment. And I know both of these pictures we have on the slideshow are actually showing during lunchtime. But it offers kind of a view into the structure of that environment. And practical life is an area for learning in Montessori, learning how to have a conversation, how to eat with each other, how to be in community in different ways. And so you actually see that during lunchtime in a different way, which is one of the reasons we chose those pictures as well, because all of the children are interacting or doing in different ways. So we also have elementary supports. We have social workers. So we have a lower and an upper elementary social worker. And those social workers not only work with students who are receiving special education services, but they also do push in wellness lessons in our community and work with general education students and partner with guides and myself as the program director on different student supports, and which is something really unique to Great River. We have deans of students, one in our elementary, and we have one in our adolescent level as well. They also do behavior interventions, team and partner with guides and other staff members in supporting students. That's part of offering those executive functioning supports. Sometimes it's oh, let's do this and then do a work in another space or take a movement break. And so our dean of students is a part of offering those different supports as we learn more about children and what they need, especially thinking about how we can build them towards independence and developing those skills as they continue with us through the years. We have academic interventions, both in the classroom, kind of those classroom-based interventions, as well as pull-out interventions with reading as well as math. And as Karen shared earlier, we are a public school, and so we have all the same types of special education services and 504 services that all public schools have and are required to have. So something really important to us and as Montessorians is having a global population and our perspective and serving our BIPOC population. We are a public charter school, and so we are a school of choice. And like all schools of choices, we are forever living in that tension of helping to bring community members to us and following the rules and regulations in Minnesota and Minnesota state law around running a lottery. So because of that, about 25% of our student body identifies as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. And we're trying to be very intentional and have been intentional around how we support and serve that community because they are part of our broader community and we would like it to be more. So we have done an equity audit and have equity goals as a part of our strategic plan. As a part of that strategic plan, we've had for multiple years now a wellness coordinator that not only partners with program directors and will work with individual guides, but leads parent groups and students, including monthly BIPOC affinity events for our BIPOC students, actually school-wide, hosted in the elementary to make that community smaller, to help students create connections across our different communities and across the school and offer mentorship as well for our older students and that opportunity for leadership. They also lead a BIPOC caregivers group that meets regularly, as well as an Indigenous caregivers group that meets regularly. So we're bringing not only that student perspective in, but also our caregiver perspective so that we can continue growing and how we meet all of our children's needs and develop that work together. So on this next slide is actually a handout. And what's really nice in the handout is it's giving a comparison of the educational framework between a Montessori and that mainstream traditional environment that you might have experienced. This is from our International Association, AMI. This is the USA version or contingent, I guess, published it. But you can see some of those ideas side by side that we've talked about. So even just thinking on Montessori, it says the teacher works in collaboration with the children, whereas the class is teacher-led in a mainstream environment. That's that comparison of what we've talked about of children developing ideas in their own work. You'll see the uninterrupted work cycles compared with block times, period lesson, where the teacher is moving them. Okay, now it's time for math. Now it's time for literacy. Hey, we're all going to do this math lesson. It might look like this. And so what individualization might looks like is a little different. The obvious piece of multi-age and grade classrooms compared to single grade classrooms. One of the other big parts of Montessori, and actually a key part in research around Montessori showing how successful it is this idea of children teaching themselves using those materials and preparing and observing that in each other. And so in mainstream research, it's called reciprocal teaching. But one of the works around children using those materials and what's unique about Montessori materials is that they have a self-correcting feedback loop, not only with each other, with the actual material itself. And so the guide or an adult doesn't have to be there telling them they're doing something right or wrong. The material itself is self-correcting. And when they work with their peers in elementary, they're able to do that self-correcting together as well. So they're getting feedback throughout the work cycle, even if it's not directed by the teacher, by that guide. And that's part of what makes it really unique. So now some logistics.
All right, and we have a question about this too. So we do have the National School Lunch Program for breakfast and lunch. So any child at the school can get a free breakfast or a free lunch, and that's funded by the state of Minnesota. And we have a lovely kitchen producing that food. And as I said, they eat breakfast. We have a nice calm setup in the cafeteria where they eat with their classrooms, and then lunches are in the classroom. So we're really looking for the children to have a good, peaceful experience where it's social and they feel supported and it's not, overwhelmingly loud or feel out of control in any way, because it's so important for children just to have those peaceful times during the day.
And also eating together as a community, even when they're in the cafeteria, they sit with the rest of their community. It's that time to talk, to ground, to start their day. And as they're slowly entering into the classroom from that work period, there are other children who have started work. They're going to go get their work journal. They're going to check in and sit down in their work spot. They're going to maybe start with however they start their day, writing the day and date. Maybe they start with a writing prompt or have a work that they start with many days. So they're learning how to transition and they're supported in that transition. And so we want a peaceful start to the day and we want children learning how to transition into work so they can build those skills and that concentration. We also have transportation, and we follow the rules with other charter schools where we have 4 school buses for elementary that go to St. Paul and Minneapolis, and both Northeast and South Minneapolis, as well as in neighborhoods in St. Paul within a certain radius. And if you have any questions about that, you can connect with Karen for busing questions. It's all based on the students who are needing busing that year. And once students accept a spot and are here, we kind of make those busing stops. And they haven't really moved much from year to year. For adolescents, they have Metro passes for everyone who lives more than a 2-mile radius from school. A lot of our students bike and walk and winter bike and do get to school in different forms.
So we have a program that we call the Big Canoe Club, and this is the before and after school care for grades 1 through 6. And it opens at 7:45 every day and then closes at 5:45 p.m. And it's a fee-based program. You can look up information on our website about that program. Sorry, I'm gonna sneeze.
And if you hadn't picked up, because we are the Great River, that's why we call it Big Canoe. The Big Canoe is in the Great River. All right.
Yeah, and so that is open. We typically do not reach a capacity in that program, so generally parents can count on having that available.
Yep.
Drop-in days are also available, and you can find rates and more information about that at our website. I was also going to mention for transportation, there's a transportation page on our website with the map of the bus stops on it, if you're curious about that. We have many after-school activities here as well. So starting with the youngest kids, we've got Big Canoe Club, but they can also participate in archery and chess activities. Lego League starts with grade 3, so they're getting a little bit older. And we do have a very thriving robotics program here at Great River. So there's about 4 different teams covering, late elementary through high school. We've got athletics. We partner with another charter school to provide university and varsity sports. Ultimate Frisbee is very big here for middle school and high school. We've got List League athletics for grades 5 through 8. Then we also have a lot of arts here. So instrumental music and choir are available starting as they get into the adolescent program. We always do a play every year and a musical every year. And so those are open high school generally and possibly different ages depending on
On the
the one
show.
that, yeah, the show.
Yeah, last year we had some elementary students as a part of the show that actually won a ton of awards
Yeah, we
with
did Les
the
Miserables.
yeah, with the Hennepin Arts Trust, Hennepin Theater Trust. And so if you look that up, Great River School last year, we we really shone there. And I
Yeah.
would say what Karen described with robotics is another strong area, as well as ultimate frisbee. Our students find is that we have a lot of different types of activities, and there's ways to explore a lot of different interests. And I think one of our strong assets is that because we have an elementary and an adolescent program, is we're able to plug into those in different ways at different times, because of the uniqueness of how we're situated as a first through 12th grade. So I will also say we have Nordic skiing, which is another big program, and those different athletics. We also have some typical programs in high school, like that partnership with baseball. So some of the things you would also find at a larger school as well. So if you have questions about those, check out the website and you can get an idea of the type of things that are offered in different seasons.
Could also answer the question about foreign language
Oh,
options. So we start teaching Spanish in grade 9
mhm,
officially as part of the curriculum. But we also have an after-school Spanish activity available starting in first grade.
mhm.
So it's really an opt-in thing up until ninth grade.
Yeah. So what comes next? Karen, as the enrollment coordinator, can kind of walk us through those next steps, but you'll see on the slide, it has some important dates and an important link. If you haven't yet, please complete an application that does have a deadline in terms of being entered for the lottery. And so you have to have completed that by Friday, February 6th in order to be run for the lottery on the 13th. You can complete it afterwards. You just go next on that bottom of the list after the lottery has been run. So if you're considering it, please definitely fill out that enrollment application.
Mhm. Yes, that's probably the biggest piece. And we're required by law to hold an enrollment lottery if we have more applications than we have spots available, which is a
Which we do.
typical situation for us. So then by the end of February, we'll notify either you might have an enrollment offer or you might have a waiting list placement. If you have any questions, please just reach out at enroll@greatriverschool.org. I am always happy to answer questions. I know people have deadlines for other schools that they have to give answers, and so just let me know. And then we are happy that we'll have some opportunities to invite you guys to come to campus.
Mhm.
And so we've got an intake day scheduled for Friday, April 24th, and that is when we invite incoming first graders to come experience a classroom, meet a guide, have a little bit of a sample of what work is like here, and then we talk to the caregivers and give an orientation. We will also offer opportunities to come tour. We'll offer opportunities for caregivers to come and observe classrooms so you can really see the magic in action and kind of start to put together all these things that we've been talking about and how does that actually work. And then we'll open up registration. And in the fall, then we'll do a back to school night with an open house for families to come back to campus. But then also all our new families will get a time to meet with their child's teacher or guide. And that's right the week before school starts, basically. So we really want to think about, how is the student experiencing coming to a new school and how can we smooth that process for them? Make sure that they're starting to form relationships, get to know their guide, see where their cubby is, and just learn a little bit of how to navigate the school so they'll feel confident.
Something we've really found is important are those new family meetings because that's the beginning of a three-year partnership with you and that classroom team, you and the guide and classroom assistant, because it is lower elementary is 3 years, upper elementary is 3 years. And so guides have 10 or 11 new students and new families that they're starting relationships with. And so those new family meetings usually take place the Wednesday or Thursday before Labor Day. So something to know. And it's important those happen before school. If for some reason family plans don't allow it, we have it later. But it's really nice when that happens beforehand because it gives time for the child to come, your child to come, and you to come. And they have an activity while you talk with the guide to learn more about them and help them be successful and have as smooth of a transition as possible. We also at Great River offer summer camps. We are one of the few places that offer summer camps down to age 4, that preschool, those preschool years. And we have both half day and full day options, which is great. A lot of our families, current families, as well as newly enrolling families, participate in those summer camps. It's a way to get into the school. A lot of our staff members actually run those. And so that means when they come on day 1, they've already started a relationship with different staff members. And they are everything from STEM and art to a play in 2 weeks to just your traditional camp of playing outside or ultimate frisbee or robotics. And so please take a look at the website. There's a summer camp section if that's interesting for you at all. And not yet posted, but new this year, we're offering something we're calling Tadpole Academy, where we are offering a specific summer camp to families whose children have accepted a new spot in lower elementary. So they have to have accepted that enrollment offer, or they're early on the wait list, and we think that might happen. And they'll come in and kind of get oriented. It's going to be taught by different classroom guides. So we'll have 2 guides, and it'll be 2 weeks, one at the end of June, one in early July. They'll start to get to know the systems. They'll forge some relationships with other children, which is great because all of our lower elementary has recess together. And so it's not only an opportunity for us to get to know your child and for them to be like, oh, now I've seen a material. Oh, when I come in for my work period, I've heard of this thing called a work journal, and I recognize this, even if I'm new to Montessori. I've used that material before, and I can talk to others and interact with others around it and practice it myself. But it also lets them forge those relationships that then they can continue to build at recess and those other community times or at Big Canoe if they're in before or after school care. So it's another way not only to orient our children, but also to give you some time to start that connection and build that relationships with us because we are a relationship-based and community school. And that's really important part of who we are here at Great River. All right.
All right. Yes.
More questions.
All right. We do have a few more questions. And one of them is what dates are the Tadpole Academy? And I am not sure.
We are so as soon as we have we are working on finalizing those. I will share the most recent dates. There was one is the week right after the 4th of July. And the other is, I believe, the 3rd or 4th week in June. And as soon as we have those, we'll post those on the website. We're just with recent events happening, we've kind of been slowed down a little bit. And we want to make sure that we've got lower elementary guides there. And so we're just finalizing that schedule. That will be a part and posted as a part of enrollment. And I know as a parent, you're registering for summer camps now. I know for sure one is the week after the 4th of July. So if you have that busy camp schedule and deadline like I do, that one you can count on for sure.
All right. Well, let's just work through the questions that people submitted. So one question is, what are some of the specific ways that you make the education individualized to the student?
Oh, do you want to take that one or do you want me to?
I think we talked about a lot of that, but I really think as when I was teaching, my practice was often that I would give a lesson to a group of maybe 10 students, and then a lot of the students would differentiate with the follow-on work. And so they always knew that there was going to be a choice. And it helps to offer a choice for the kids who maybe don't have anything in mind, but then you always have children who are like, well, we want to do this, and they have it all like thought out and planned out. And so a lot of that individualization kind of comes in situations like that. And I think that's probably quite true of elementary because we do have a curriculum that we know we need to hit the points,
with lessons.
We have to cover certain topics or certain, everybody needs to learn fractions by whatever age or whatever, and so sometimes there isn't as much choice in what you're studying, but there's a lot of choice in how you're going to study it, basically.
And I would also say, I think a lot of the individualization comes in some of the things you actually see in the environment, where you sit, what you need specifically to make that start of day work plan. guides on a typical 5-day week are conferencing with students. And so how they're checking in on that follow-on, how they're handling the situation. Even just like when they're thinking about lesson groups. And so many things happen in larger lesson groups, but some are smaller. And so some is like, oh, I know these children are going to be successful together in a different way. So here's what I'm going to do. Or I know these first graders at the start of the year need a lot more guidance. So I'm going to do it in this way. Or I observe, oh, they recognize these materials. They know what to do. I'm going to give them some more freedom in that work period where these other children need some more kind of constraints or responsibility. And I always think about the term liberty. So we want children to develop freedom. And as adults in the space, our job is to look at how much liberty and how much space we're allowing them and figure out how are we restricting that in the right way that they can develop their freedom and that kind of that self-efficacy and their will. And Montessorians talk a lot about developing the child's will, that will to learn, that understanding of balance. Yes, you have choices. And as an adult, it's my responsibility to make sure you do a balance of work. And so here's what I am doing to support you in that balance of work. And so we know children are going to choose things they enjoy doing first. So it might be bringing them towards like, oh, every day we do math. Or if you did math all day yesterday, let's balance that with some writing. And so sometimes that individualization depends on what the child needs because we both want to balance building concentration and having that balance of work over a week, over 2 weeks. And so because we're not all going from a math lesson to a reading lesson to a science lesson at exactly the same time, the structure of those work periods and the way the curriculum in Montessori is presented to children allows for individualization in a very different way.
All right. Can you speak about your experience with young students with ADHD? Also, with the public school supports, does that mean that if needed, a 504 IEP can be implemented? If so, do you all offer support with developing these plans?
Yep.
So let's answer the second part of that question first,
Yep.
which is yes, we can develop a 504. 504 is a thing that comes into play when a child has an outside diagnosis. So I think it is important to say that as an educational institution, we never provide a diagnosis. We come up with a way to educate a child based on what they show us their challenges are. So you can't just say, I want a 504, you have to have a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Because it's a document that says we're going to accommodate for diagnosis. And IEP can be either way, it helps to get a diagnosis, but sometimes it can be developed through data that we've collected as well.
And we have, just like all public schools, we have a process for looking at children, strategically providing interventions, doing those observations and seeing like, oh, let's do a classroom-based intervention. Oh, we're noticing this. And so now we need to do, say, a pull-out intervention for reading is a very typical intervention that happens, especially in lower elementary, depending on where children are at in their reading development. So we know we have a lot of that in lower elementary in a different way. And as children get into upper elementary, we actually see it working very differently. And by the time they get to 5th and 6th grade, compared with their peers across the nation, our children are actually performing much higher than their peers across the nation when we look at standardized testing scores. And I really think that can be attributed to the way we teach and the way students learn through writing and the development of those individual interests. They're writing more because they're excited about it. And they're developing reading, vocabulary, comprehension. And we have a very strong foundation that gets built upon with those interests. And so by the time they get to 5th and 6th grade, what we actually see is even compared to mainstream peers, their scores are just soaring. And so I think that's a thing to think about in terms of those different supports. Now, your question regarding also with 504, something very interesting is in a lot of mainstream environments, things like freedom of movement, a lot of the pieces that are just a part of how a Montessori environment operates are actually written into those 504s. So oftentimes when students come, we actually stop and observe and we're like, oh, that's always true for all students. And so when we're developing those, or if you're coming, especially in older grades, we take some time to be like, oh, what is a different accommodation we would offer in those 504s? Or if there are questions that lets us know, like, oh, we're going to have to be really intentional with how they're sitting, with maybe they have a concentration spot for a child with ADHD because the guide isn't observing, and that's part of the intervention. I know I can speak for many of our students that a lot of neuro students who are neurodivergent have an opportunity to learn here in a way where they just it's how everyone is learning. And so they don't feel like something different is happening because everyone has that freedom of movement or different seating. They're not singled out in the same way. And so there's very much they're a part of that community, and guides are watching and observing for those things and being intentional with not only those interventions, but also being like, oh, this student needs a little more movement. Okay, at 10 o'clock, like I said, maybe they use the yoga space. Maybe they're doing an intentional break with a group of students with the classroom assistant. There are a lot of different ways that that looks in different communities, depending on the needs of the children. But again, it's based on the needs of the children. So we start with observing.
And I think specifically for students who have ADHD, I mean, we laugh a little bit when that question comes up because it always comes up. And I think that we have a number of students
Yep.
who have ADHD. And I think that our team has come up with some really effective interventions for helping those children become successful. I think there can often be challenges around developing concentration, especially in an environment where other children are talking and moving and things like that. And there can be challenges around impulsivity or executive functioning. And so we really work with the child to help them try to understand their own brain, try to understand patterns, and say, like, hey, what I'm noticing is every day at the end of the day, when we're getting in line to go to the lunch, to get our lunches, you
You need something
yeah,
different.
yes, you need something different. You're having a hard time in the line, maybe it might be something that a child would be having difficulty with. Well, why have that child be lining up with the class then? So I really think that we take a very pragmatic approach of, if this keeps happening and this child is really struggling, let's try something different and new and see if we can scaffold it. Someday they will be able to be in line, but that's not going to be today. And so
Not yet.
let's have a different plan where they feel like, okay, I can transition from classroom to lunch and be successful and not get derailed every day. So I think we take a really compassionate approach and a partnership kind of approach with children and families to kind of look at these problems that kids are having in an environment and say, how can we work on this? What can we do to help you, be more successful?
And I will share as well that I think really partnering with parents is one of our goals. And also partnering with you on thinking about how can you be independent at home and practice those things at school. I always share early in the year is at school, children can get a snack from their backpack, go to the snack table during the morning work period. Do they have access to snacks and can they do that at home? And so it's something very small, but thinking about how are we creating environments everywhere for that independence? How are we partnering? And so we're giving those same messages and how we're learning from you as caregivers who know your children and are the experts in those things. And that it's back to that start of your family meeting and the importance of that to kind of front load as much of that as we can as we transition, because it does take time to observe. And you know your child very well, and we want to have a strong partnership with you.
So there's a question about work journals. In our journals, can you write out a problem that you are trying to solve? And can it be used as a journal for thoughts and feelings or just for lessons? So when we talk about the work journal, it's really used just for tracking work.
Yep.
That's not to say that you would not have a place to write about thoughts and feelings, which would probably be your
Right.
language journal,
Yep.
or it might be, in response to a particular lesson or
For
prompt.
example,
What does that
this is
say?
my youngest child's, and this is in September.
Yeah.
And so this was a first grader. Um,
And I also, like in my classroom, because we had a community meeting every week, if there was a problem that students were trying to solve, we actually had a
Mhm.
class meeting book. And
Yeah.
children would write in the class meeting book, I would like to discuss this, you know, so we really had places where they could put those.
And I think the work journal is not like I think what Karen pointed out, that journaling sense. There are other tools we have for that.
Yeah.
There's a spot where children write down their math work. There is a spot for journaling in that language work. Sometimes, especially early on, some guides might have children write their writing prompt in here because it's a daily thing that they check and look at. Um, but this is really that tool of building executive functioning skills and trying to have work in that development of work, be in that space. And this is really the work journal. Hold it
Mhm.
as it gets bigger. She was so excited when she graduated to a bigger one, let me tell you. But this is that tool of responsibility and freedom. And so keeping that work journal place and recording that work and building that skill.
Mhm.
And it sometimes in Laurel, if they have the day and date in one thing, if we're observing them working, that's growth. And then they get older and older. And by the time they get to third grade and fourth grade and fifth and sixth grade, what they're recording and how it's working, it is frankly sometimes more skills than many adults have.
Since each classroom community has multiple grades in it, how are the needs of each grade met differently and where do they overlap? Um,
And on
yeah,
the children.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our teachers try to not always give the same groups of children
Mhm,
lessons. So sometimes they're really deliberately mixing ages.
mhm,
Sometimes they are doing more targeted lessons. A good example might be math, where
mhm,
really children are at a certain place and you're going to have your targeted math groups. But something like a cultural lesson,
mhm,
really, you could deliberately mix up the ages in ways that would
mhm,
be supportive to the students. But I think part of it is just you're not teaching to the whole class all the time. So you're
mhm,
not expecting all those multiple grades to be doing the same thing at the same time. And I always found it very, very supporting to have those different ages.
mhm.
It is fantastic as a teacher to have 2/3 of your class come back every year because they know you know them, they know the classroom. You just step right back into it. It's great because I think it leads to less competition in the environment. Students don't feel like they have to outdo everyone or feel insecure if somebody is ahead of them because that person's probably older than they are. And so it just falls into this natural hierarchy that feels more family-like
Mhm.
and less competitive. And you can have those really interesting relationships, mentoring, really great friendships where maybe you have an older student who's maybe a little less advanced socially, and then they gravitate towards the younger kids. And those relationships really can happen very, very naturally and in ways that really support the children.
And I would say what Karen was touching upon in terms of those different areas, uh, and building on strengths. If a guide is giving botany lessons to a group of children, they're able to really access and understand like the parts of a plant differently than if they're doing that early literacy lesson where they're learning. Those groups might be more or need to be more based on those skill level where an understanding of parts of the plant, how they're going through, how something works in those different subject areas, just lends itself for different groupings.
Mhm.
And I think something that's really unique, I spent many years in mainstream environments, many, almost more than a decade. And what I noticed the most as I learned more about Montessori and became a part of our larger Montessori community is that so much of our mainstream time is spent on literacy and math, and we don't touch those other subject areas. And in a Montessori environment, because it's so integrated, children learn in those different subject areas all the time. They're actually learning science. They're learning geography. They're learning where places are in the world. They're learning geometry and math and these different cultural areas and history. And it's truly woven throughout. And they're doing the math and literacy as it goes as well. But that's part of what creates that narrative and that understanding of the world. And part of creates that joy we were talking about is because they have a more complex view of what it means to live in the world together and what our world is like.
All right. Do we focus on cursive writing or do they also learn print?
They learn both.
All right, great. I'm glad to have a four-word answer.
Yeah.
We got 14 more to go.
And I
Okay.
will say, you might have noticed my daughter's her work journal was in cursive
Yeah.
because the way you do strokes in cursive helps them write faster. And so
Mhm.
often children, we do want them to practice and intentionally learn that because the way it supports their fine motor skills is incredibly strong.
Mhm. And
So
letter formation.
and letter formation.
Don't do the reversals in
Mhm.
cursive.
They don't do reversals in cursive. There's a lot of strong research around that.
All right. What are some of the reasons that a student may not thrive in a Montessori learning environment?
That is a very interesting question.
Mhm.
I would say, I think as what's the hardest part about coming from a mainstream to a Montessori learning environment is actually that initial time of learning those executive functioning skills and how to support their own kind of like build their own learning. I would say when I think of children who have struggled a bit more, it's actually how we're partnering with you as caregivers, how we're actually supporting developing that independence and a lot of those skills, both at home and at school together, so we can give them even more skills and supports, not only during the school day, but like how are we supporting independence at home? How are they practicing those practical life skills? How are they doing that so that they can transfer them faster because it does take some transition time to learn in a way that's a little different coming from, well, the teacher told me to move to this next, and I'm learning how to move to it next with guidance, more
Mhm.
guidance at first. But that's actually part of the skill we're learning. And it really is that superpower of the research behind executive functioning skills is I can teach you how to make priorities, how to do a list. But if I don't have the time and space to practice it, to actually build those skills, then I'm not going to learn them.
Mhm.
I'm not going to internalize them. And it actually loops back to the conversation or the question around children who have ADHD. And one of the strongest things we can do for those children is intentionally teach those executive functioning skills and create that time and space to learn those.
Mhm.
And that is one of the things that a Montessori environment um, has intentional time and space to create. One of the things that I hear the most from, I'm thinking this year's first year parents, as talking about how it reframes how they think about even just parenting their own child and bringing in that question of how is this promoting independence? Or
Mhm.
how is this creating an on ramp to independence, even if it's small? And so that partnership becomes so important to help children be successful, especially if they're new to a Montessori education.
Mhm. And actually, that kind of answers our next question too about
Right.
scaffolding for students who are new to Montessori.
Mhm.
Um,
We every year at the start of the year, this year we had a new family kind of parent education night in September. We have things at the family meeting and the open house as well. The other thing we hadn't mentioned is we have a back to school night before school with that family meeting. We also have a caregiver orientation in each community. So you get to meet other caregivers in that community. The guide leads it. They share different resources like how to promote independence at home. Sometimes they'll show like materials, and you'll get to ask questions in your classroom community. And that we do that to start bridging that kind of like putting together that partnership, not only with the guide, but as a community with each other, and to get you in the classroom seeing some of how that works. We then open up observations for our current families every November. We wait for those because we don't want to get in the way of children's work and we want to give them time to learn that work. That's why we wait till November. But that's another way that you can get in and see, like, how does this actually work? What does it look like? And what am I noticing about that work and how I might think about things at home? Even where do you keep your dishes for your children in the kitchen? Can they get them themselves?
mhm.
How are you baking with them? Because that's actually one of the ways we scale up for math, because you have to practice fractions when you're scaling up a recipe. And so thinking about different ways that we can do that. And so they're practicing with you at home as well, because it also just builds a bridge to our school communities and their experiences here.
Mhm. All right. What Montessori training do your guides have and how long have they taught?
Well, it depends on different guides. We have all AMI or AMS trained guides, and it kind of depends on the particular ones. Our guides right now, I mean, if you have kind of specific questions in different communities, I can share it. We have everyone from guides who have joined Great River this past year to guides who have, oh gosh, 10, 15 so much. We opened the elementary 14 years ago who have been here since its opening. And so there's just like any school and any Montessori school, there's a range. And we want there to be a range because that's actually the sign of a healthy community that we don't have only one thing and that we have that range.
Mhm.
And that we can learn from each other. And so we do a lot of collaboration. We have regular PLCs. We meet once a week as a lower elementary guide community and an upper elementary guide community to talk together, to share ideas, to just do logistical things, and really capitalize on the superpower of having 6 lower elementary communities, because it's not just one guide trying to figure out everything on their own. And it's our communities together.
Mhm. All right, I know you mentioned that the students get a 45-minute recess, which is awesome, but are there other times they get to enjoy being outside during the day? Yes.
As much as possible. So we have a garden here on campus. We have outdoor education, which is about an hour and 45 minutes where they're spending time outside. A lot of times, especially as the weather is nicer or just not frigid, we're going to
Yeah.
define as not frigid. We go outside for movement breaks. Some of our either classroom assistants, education assistants might take students outside. They might do an activity like when guides present the river model and learn about rivers, they're going to do that outside and not in the classroom where it's going to make a mess.
Mhm.
Our classrooms have doors. Many of our classrooms have doors to the outside, and so in trying to utilize those spaces in different ways is something that we do whenever possible. And we have a lot of natural light. And so that's a really big piece. We want to bring in a feeling of nature and just calm. At this time of day, it's usually not dark when we're in the classroom. That whole wall of windows would have light coming in. And so it's a warm, beautiful, inviting, nature-based space to be in. We have a lot of plants in classrooms. We have classroom pets. Everything from axolotls to hedgehogs to geckos to, and here we've got a turtle and Sugar the gerbil. Got it. Oh, yep, Sugar the gerbil. Nope, hamster. Sugar the hamster. It's late at night. Sorry. And children learn how to care for those pets. And when pets go through that life cycle, they do research around getting a new classroom pets. So we try to bring nature inside as much as possible as well, knowing the constraints of Minnesota weather.
All right. When will observations be scheduled? Will observations only be for parents whose child is offered a spot? So I think typically we offer observations in the classroom in, I think it's April and May.
Yep.
And then we will offer those observations either they're to everybody who receives an enrollment offer, but then we also will offer them to the top people on the wait list. So if it seems that you're likely to receive an enrollment offer, then we will offer the chance to observe. I think I can say that anybody who applies for first grade is probably going to get the chance to observe. And then for older grades, I think that we don't have as many openings.
Yeah. And one of the big reasons that is children age up from year to year. And in first grade, we have 6 classrooms of spots to fill, and there aren't children coming from a children's house who have those spots. And so first grade is a year where most of our families come in. In other grade levels, it depends. We are a public school, and so we have the regular attrition and changes that any school has, with children just moving to other states or doing movement for different reasons. And so that's something to think about. That's why we have the most spots in first grade. We also have families that might be on wait lists at other charter schools or just other schools in general. And that's one of the reasons we intentionally offered a spot on the wait list as well, and those opportunities in first grade, because we know that's where we've historically had the most movement, because that's where we have the bulk of our spots in the elementary program.
And I'm going to answer this other question because it's related. So they're asking about transitions in the student body. For example, how often do students come in after first grade? So, I mean, we will typically have anywhere from 0 to 6 openings in a grade level in
Mhm.
elementary.
For
So it
second
really,
through sixth
for
grade.
second through 6th grade,
Yep.
because it really just is dependent on another child leaving. So we tend to have less than 5% turnover in our student
Mhm.
body in a year, um,
And
from
I
year to year.
and I will share, we do have sibling preference that starts the day your child first comes to school. So if it's a
Mhm.
first grader, the first day of school. And so siblings do get preference because that follows Minnesota state law and how those requirements work. And our goal is to have families stay together.
Mhm.
For those upper grades, often a spot is offered partway through the year. And so
Mhm.
that's just something to know. And so we can always, and it depends. There are some years where a grade level moves quite a bit. And
Mhm.
then another grade level doesn't move at all.
Mhm.
And it's just how things work. As a school of choice, our caregivers drive in from as far as Woodbury and Blaine and Bloomington and Coon Rapids. And sometimes it's the logistics that stands in the way of a family staying. I would say that when I think about attrition locally, that the family logistics and figuring out how does this work for our family? What does this look like? Who are our support people as we're looking through the logistics of the day? I think that is sometimes just one of those challenges
Mhm.
that each family has to figure out for themselves what works. And we have families who make that drive from New Brighton every day because they see how different a Montessori education at Great River is compared to the other schools they were looking at.
Mhm.
And so that's a conversation for you if you're curious more about logistics for your family. Look at that Big Canoe page. Think about those both Minneapolis and St. Paul bus routes and think about those logistics for you.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and the part of this question is how often do you see students leaving or finding it is not a good fit? I mean, I think we see more often that it's the logistics,
logistics.
or maybe they weren't able to get all their siblings in,
Mhm.
especially a family,
Of-
that has 5 or 6 siblings, it's going to be
Mhm.
really hard to get them all in at the same time.
And so figuring out, I think that's talking to Karen about your specific
Mhm.
situation is the best way forward. Sometimes we'll have adolescent students start and then add in elementary
Mhm.
children in those different grade levels once they start school and have that sibling preference. And
Mhm.
so first grade is that opening spot, like I said, for elementary, but there are different entry points in our adolescent program as well. Again, just because of the natural attrition and choices that
Mhm.
all of our public schools see. And we
And
have a lot of families who stay through the whole experience as
mhm.
well.
And then do many students arrive or leave at the middle school or high school transition? So I'd say really what we've noticed in the past few years is just now that we have students starting in first grade and going through that, I think we have a little bit more turnover at ninth grade. I think because students are like, yeah, but what else is out there?
Mhm.
Or
What choices?
yeah, what choices
Mhm.
are there? Or they want,
Mhm.
a bigger high school population, or, just different things that they are looking around for.
And I,
So
and
that,
I
yeah.
think that's some, but I will also, I think it's important as well, is we have a lot of students who, when they're looking at like, oh, I have connections not only with peers, but with our staff members that work elementary and adolescent level who know me. As families, I think, learn about our IB diploma program. It's an amazing, rigorous curriculum. We have a college counselor on staff that actually meets with students, that works with them, that helps make college plans. I think some of those pieces of our high school program that keep people here, whether it's robotics or arts or theater, or ultimate frisbee that wins nationals all the time. Um, those students who stay here have plugged into those different unique things, or have really found that balance of like, oh, I can play List League baseball and play for this nationally ranked ultimate frisbee team if I'm a sports
Mhm.
student, or I really love robotics, or the way we do theater, and how I'm able to be in these productions that win awards across the state is really different than if I went to a large high school in my home district.
Mhm.
And so I think that's really a conversation. And again, part of that choice with children as they get older and become students and young people in a different way. And so I'm happy to have any personal conversations as you're thinking about that as well. I have 3 children who are 2 in lower elementary and 1 in upper on elementary on the cusp of adolescence next year. Um, As Karen laughs.
Yep,
Um,
rapidly moving towards adolescence.
rapidly. We are fast. And so I can share, I'm always happy to have conversations and share kind of the considerations from a parent perspective as well, if that's a wondering that you have. And so don't hesitate to reach out. Um, we have families who are highly committed to being a part of our community. I know we say that so many times, but I think, especially at a time like this with things in the world, we're seeing it even more. And so it's one of the absolutely phenomenal parts about being a part of Great River.
I'm just going to do a time check.
Yep.
It is
Oh,
7:33 and we've got 6 more questions.
oh,
So I just we'll answer these, but we'll try to
yep.
answer them a little more quickly.
Absolutely. Thank you. And feel free if you need to head out, feel free to do that. We'll keep going through questions. And we have no new content that we're sharing beyond the questions.
All right. Can you talk a little bit about how gender is addressed at the lower elementary age? Mostly wondering about if this is also children-led and how is bathroom choice handled? So I will say
Great.
bathroom choice right away, which is that all of our bathrooms are gender neutral. And so
Have been for like a decade.
yes, and I think it's one of those examples of trying to make it something that is open for everybody in the community so that certain children do not feel singled out in the choices that they're making. And it's really been a very positive thing for our whole community, I think.
And some of our wellness lessons that we reference, our social workers do talk about gender. We use books and literacy and kind of those best practices around those pieces as well.
And we do have a GSA club
In the adolescent level and in upper elementary.
in upper elementary as well. Yeah.
I'm looking at the, so there's a question about FastBridge assessments. And so we are a public school and we have to follow all the guidelines, all Minnesota public schools do, including the READ Act. We actually use FastBridge screening as a part of kind of like our intervention systems of support. One of the things I actually really like about it, especially in lower elementary, is that it's not on a computer, it's actually done one-on-one. Children are reading with an adult, a staff member. And so screening all of our children so that we can identify those additional areas of need is actually a legal requirement for us with the state. And so we do follow those state rules. And I'm happy to chat more about that. I actually serve as our literacy lead for the school and have my literacy license and have taught reading for many, many years and led in that. So I'm happy to have further conversations.
Yeah, and having those assessments is really helpful, I think, as
See,
kind of a way of double checking that our curriculum is reaching children in the ways that we think it is reaching them. And so I think it's really nice to be able to kind of also have some hard data to refer to and say, okay, you know, what I think I see is what I'm seeing.
And I would say when Karen refers to hard data, things compared to other children across the nation and across the state. And so that comparison piece.
All right. Right now, my child's classroom environment is very chaotic and loud. How does Great River help to make sure that students can have peaceful and productive learning times?
Well, I would say that kind of goes back to some of the things that we've talked about in terms of how we build community, how we make those individual plans. It the goal of that morning work cycle is having that uninterrupted work time. And for some children, the amount of noise that they need or don't need is a little different. And so it really depends on your child and what that looks like in terms of chaotic and loud. But I would say starting off the year with those classroom norms, building those norms as a community, referring and coming back to those norms, and then having the guides and all of the support adults use those norms and then create what we've talked about in terms of those individualized plans. We also know that children have different needs. And so all of our classrooms have things like noise canceling headphones. We have access to things like weighted blankets and other support tools in the classroom that not only are accessible, but in sometimes with children, we might kind of work into an individualized plan to make sure that's not the experience.
And I think there's a difference between like the busy hum of students who are working and students who are out of control or chaotic,
Yeah.
you know, and we're really working to make sure that we have that busy hum. So it's not a silent classroom, but it is a classroom where you can feel that air of work rather than, oh, you know, I don't know what this child is going to do next and I'm really nervous. You know, it's like the students can lean into working because the classroom is orderly and the children know the guidelines and follow them, even if they're not being silent, which they're not.
No, because we don't want them to be silent. We want them to be talking together because that's part of how they learn.
Mhm. All right. Looking at the Minnesota report card, I see a pretty wide split between math versus reading test scores. Why
Mhm.
some our math scores are lower than our reading scores. Why do you think that's the case?
Oh,
And do you
yeah.
have a plan for increasing math and science competencies?
So the first thing that I would say with that is that one of the parts of math that's really interesting in Montessori is how we use those concrete materials, and then how students then start transferring those in different contexts. And one of the things I've really noticed, especially in the earlier grades, is we just don't spend a lot of time on devices. And we're not going to spend a bunch of time on devices so that we do better on an MCA when we're observing in the classroom that something is working, because then it takes away time from other things that we're working on.
Mhm.
And so I think one thing that we really look at in terms of especially our math and science is what's different from the observations we're seeing in the classroom at the elementary level specifically, and what are those pieces on a computer, and how do we help see what we're observing and where those gaps are. And is it in understanding or is it in their computer skills? Because I've observed our children take those MCAs and I'm like, oh, I know you know that. You just don't have a ton of skills with a mouse or on a device. And so that's one thing I will share, especially for those younger grades and those scores.
Mhm.
In terms of math, the state has charged us with doing a huge focus on literacy. I would say, especially internally, when we look at students who are at or above grade level, by the time we hit sixth grade, we're looking at 90% of students at or above grade level, and often even higher in that kind of college pathway for literacy. We're really looking at how we focus on that with math, with process, because as we kind of go through and cycle through and build upon that foundation, um, one of the things we know, especially with math and science, is that if your literacy skills aren't there, you can't access world problems. You can't write out a process. You can't read scientific data. And so starting with literacy, both for a state and for us, is actually a way to build that foundation so we can then focus on the science and math specific
Mhm.
skills and not have it kind of have literacy and reading be what's standing in the way.
Mhm.
And so that's where that PLC work kind of comes back in that I referenced, where guides come back, they talk together, we look at learning and scope and sequence, we look at process, and we know that having that time and space for executive functioning means that order of learning sometimes looks a little different for children, but once they hit that groove, they build those executive functioning skills. It's like their was going like this, and it just starts going up so much faster as they continue to age and then use those skills to do the math learning
Mhm.
or to do that science learning. In upper elementary, with the specific science standards as well, that's part of the 3-year cycle because you're in a classroom for 3 years where we've built in a STEM project as a part of the 3-year cycle. And so over the 3 years, they're getting some deep delves into those specific standards. And the new standards, especially those in science that are so process-based, align so well with our Montessori curriculum. Really grounding ourselves in that curriculum is one of the ways we really go into those science standards.
I think the other difficulty that we see in math is that we are teaching it so differently
Process.
from the way that public school,
Uh,
mainstream schools are teaching it. And so when you're learning how to do division by using stamps and distributing them among the pawns that and you've doing division and you're doing it correctly and coming up with the right answers and really internalizing how to do division by doing this process, you are not going to have the strong skills for writing that on paper yet. And so what
Yet.
we see is that there's a gap with our younger kids where they know how to do the work, but they don't know how to abstract it yet, but they're developing the understanding through using the materials. And so it's partly a reflection of just our priorities versus the priorities of a mainstream education, where I would say that our outcomes, and as students get older, they're gaining those math skills and those abstraction skills. But we want them to have that grounding in what does this actually mean by doing it physically.
What is place value? What is number sense? When you look at our adolescent level and the children who are coming all the way through, they're in those higher level math classes um, at the same rate as students who are coming from mainstream environments. And so they're able to access and do that higher level math in that lower adolescent and upper adolescent. It just might appear differently, especially in terms of the computer-based tests, especially when students in other schools are spending most of their times on those apps for their practice. Ours are using materials, they're practicing the process, they're writing it down, they're not clicking through an app. And so their fluency with those is just very different.
And I will say, my child who graduated in
Oh,
2022
great example.
is a math major in college now and just gave a talk at a conference on their math research that they've been doing, that they've been getting funded through their university,
Yeah.
and has done things like, trying to solve this math problem by using Python. So then they had to teach themselves Python, but then they weren't happy with that. So then they're like, well, I think I'll teach myself how to use C plus, and they're just learning all these computer languages really quite intuitively because they know how to learn. And so that's really come to them. And I think in a lot of ways that
Skill.
love of research comes from the way they were educated in a Montessori education. That idea of like, there are problems out there waiting to be solved. And isn't this exciting,
And I think what Karen says, if they know how to learn, that's something else our graduates come back and tell us. Hey, my peers might have fine test scores, but I know how to learn. I know how to write. I know how to be a learner and take these next steps and have those skills of independence. And really those skills, when you look at those broader like college and career checklists, it's those skills that we're teaching and creating space for and intentionally creating opportunities and supports for all the way down through our elementary school. There one more?
There's two more, but one of them is an easy one, and one of them is the harder one.
All right, sorry.
So does the guidance staff go through cultural training for various diverse communities? The term BIPOC can be used as a catch-all and sometimes attempts to fit round pegs in square holes.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so like everything, we do it in cycles because you can't learn everything at once. I can share that actually on Monday, we have an Indigenous leader in the Montessori community actually coming to do work with our elementary team, not only our guides, but our classroom assistants and support staff, which is something different. It's not only our teachers, but all the staff interacting around Indigenous knowledge, ways of learning, and those connections in Montessori in our curriculum. And so that's just one example of ways that we intentionally do that work. Really trying to not just talk about it, but intentionally build time and space to kind of workshop with it and bring in things that and resources, people, individuals that can help us build that practice.
And that's part of our strategic plan is we have an equity focus in the strategic plan that the board has set. And one of those pieces is a real commitment to doing cultural competency work every year, not just, every 5 years because we need to check it off for relicensure, but really
hours and hours.
Yeah, hours and hours every year because we really feel like in some ways we don't have a lot of choice with how we run our lottery and things like that, but we do have the choice and the privilege to serve our students and staff members well that we have in our community. And
I would say one of the parts of all of our guides in a Montessori education is really by having that like world focus on even just how we talk about history, how we teach different cultural areas, and how we learn is really taking a broader perspective. I know with some of the things going on, we had a day and our guides regrounded themselves in our migration materials and migration lessons. And we had books on raising up the stories of migration, of immigrant voices, just as one example of something we did this month. And so grounding in those materials and then adding to those intentionally in collaboration with each other, with our wellness coordinator, and doing that as we're going. So it actually can be used in the community and not just check off a box to say we did something, but really trying to connect it to the practice. And like everyone, we're not perfect at it. And we're trying to be intentional and help to really try to apply it in those different ways.
and then
the last question is about siblings in the classroom. So we have found, so siblings are generally in different communities. We have 6 communities at each level, so make it very easy to have different communities for siblings. I There are some rules around twins. And so if you are a parent of twins, I would love to have a conversation, and I'm happy to share with you some of the experiences we've had. Because it's a multi-age classroom, we do not move students from year to year. And so that is a pretty hard and fast, unless there is a specific need for students, we do not switch classrooms. And so it is a 3-year time in a classroom and a 3-year commitment. And so having those conversations is really important. But as a practice, siblings are in different classrooms. I can share my own children, both in lower elementary, are in different classrooms. And they are very successful there because they're able to be and grow into themselves in a different way.
Yeah, and it's part of that independence, that real focus on who are you as a person and how can you be an independent whole self.
Mhm.
And I think that sometimes people ask for siblings to be placed together, maybe out of an idea that they'll support each other, but that's a short-term gain
Mhm.
and it kind of costs, especially the younger
Mhm.
sibling, the opportunity to be independent, I
Mhm.
think. But
Yeah.
we're happy to talk about
Yeah,
that
happy to.
at great
I
length.
will share, in recent years, sometimes even if twins might have been together in lower elementary, I actually can't think of an instance recently where they haven't intentionally asked to be separated in upper elementary. And so I can share that. And I would love to have further conversations because it's also really personal.
Yeah.
And it depends on who your children are. Just like everything, we try to take an individual approach to those pieces. And you get to share information when you accept a spot. One of the forms you get to fill out asks you to tell us about your child or children. And so that's your time to share information with us. And we use that as a part of class placement. Tadpole Academy shares a lot about some great classroom dynamics and social pieces so we can be as intentional as possible with our class placement process.
And that is the end of the questions. And we still have 14 participants. So thank you for hanging on to the
Thank you.
very end. It's been really great to share our school with you. Please send me an email if you think of other questions. And I really am looking forward to meeting you in person soon. I'm really sad that we couldn't have done that tonight, but
And thank you for
Thank you for my
understanding
labor.
as we needed to change the format to make sure all of our families feel safe, that they can access this information in our space in a way that is equitable, given the current situation in our community. So thank you for understanding that last minute shift. We're sad to not be in person, and we are so excited to welcome you for a tour and other things very soon. So thank you.
Good night.
Good night.